Namaskar and welcome to episode number 7 of our podcast called Pustakalya Wala Podcast. Today I have decided to have a recap episode of the first 7 episodes and what I learned during those 7 episodes. And this is kind of a milestone podcast that I have planned in such a way as to always be aware of the bigger picture rather than just be lost in the minutiae of every day's episode and the book itself, just to from time to time step out and see the whole process from a little afar and see what all we learned. um, since this is a podcast where I have no idea what I'm learning, what I'm going to learn in the future. It's not planned at all. I'm still learning how to structure it properly so as to be a little bit useful to anyone who's listening, and hopefully it's also entertaining, if I can dare to say that. So let's go back to the whole, starting from episode number 0. I got this idea while I was exercising about the anatomy of touch. When you're touching something, you're not actually touching it. The atoms don't work that way. The atoms are really tiny. So what is happening is the electron clouds are interacting with each other, and there is a repulsion force and there is an attractive force. Repulsion is because of the electron cloud repulsing each other. Is that a word? Repelling each other. And the van der Waals forces, which are a little more complex, which we won't go right into right now. But the point is, it was all electric, and from there I went on to um, um, think about what, because I've already been interested in the idea of consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness. How do we even come up with a theory of consciousness from the functional understanding of the brain? There, some people think there will always be a gap. David Chalmers thinks that. He thinks there is always going to be a gap, and we cannot pass that gap between the functionality of the brain and how that results in consciousness, because none of the functional processes are in their essence. They don't have to be feel like something. They can still fulfill all the functionality that they are fulfilling without being conscious. So this is the reason that conscious comes up is ultimately mysterious. That's what his claim is. But other people like Anil Seth, this neuroscientist, is he a neuroscientist? He's a researcher in consciousness field, and he has a lot of other um, expertise in similar neuroscience background. I am not really sure, but his idea is that the hard problem can be solved by chipping away at the soft problem, not the soft problem, the easy problem. I was thinking of the opposite of hard, and I thought of soft rather than easy. The easy problem of consciousness, which is to relate the conscious states with the neural correlates of consciousness. What is happening in the brain? Um, how does it relate to what is happening in the mind? And if we his point of view is that if we kind of understand it more and more thoroughly, it will become evident to us. And I started with believing David Chalmers' passive pessimism was valid and justified, but I think Anil Seth has a point, and it kind of does make sense because, well, consciousness, the more I think about it, the more I realize that consciousness cannot be an epiphenomenon. It cannot be just an afterthought. It has to be taken into consideration by the brain or the processing of the brain as an input. If you are feeling bad, if you're feeling unnecessary anxiety, if you're feeling um, depressed, that has an effect on your behavior, doesn't it? Like if wha- so there has to be some circular ability, the feedback mechanism for consciousness to affect functionality in some ways. And if we can understand that, maybe we can understand why consciousness arose. Maybe it was because of this real real time feedback from the environment, which was required by the mind to function properly. Maybe that is the role. Okay, let me go back to the recap. So that was where I'm coming from. And this idea just came into my mind, that why can't consciousness be just the electromagnetic field, the patterns in the electromagnetic field? And some ways, electromagnetic fields are these mysterious things. We know how they function. We know the equations that govern it. We know the four Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism, but we don't know much more about it. At least I don't know much more about it. So I thought maybe that's the place where consciousness is coming from. That's a valid question. It's a very interesting question. So, and I correctly assume that some people might have thought about it before and done some research. So I came to my computer and searched for it, and sure enough, I found theories and books on this idea by two people, John Joe McFadden and Susan Pocket. Initially, I let go of John Joe McFadden's work because it was a little tangential to the question of consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness. It was tackling the agency issue, whether conscious EM fields can affect the behavior of other neurons, and somehow that works as evidence. That may not work as evidence, but according to Anil Seth, that kind of work will really actually help in understanding if, in fact, consciousness does arise from that. So, I may have prematurely set aside his work. Maybe I should go back later on to understand what exactly has been happening in that part of the research phase. But I got attracted by Susan Pocket's book on nature of consciousness, which she printed in 1999, where she starts with from the point of view where I start with, and then goes on to explain what will count as evidence for a theory like that. And I am surprised in a lot of ways, pleasantly surprised, and a little bit um, unpleasantly surprised. First of all, pleasantly surprised by the fact that a lot of people are much smarter than me, and it's easier to follow their logic rather than come up with it on my own. It's hard to come up with all the scenarios in which what you think an evidence would work doesn't work, because a lot of other people have come up with better solutions and also refuted what you think would work as evidence, right? So and secondly, I understood how hard it is to get exact evidence that really works for this kind of a problem, which cannot be conflated by anything else, right? That's what I learned in the last few episodes. The details of that you can go back and listen. The details are interesting, but I don't remember much of them. The one problem that I still have with that is not cleared is that I am not sure because right now there are two competing, not competing, but there are two independent theories on this. One is that the rest of the field, the what Anil Seth and other people are working on is the Christoph Koch or Koch, I don't know. He's one of the um, long time researchers on the easy problem and the hard problem of consciousness, and what they work on is termed as the psychoneural theory of consciousness, which says that consciousness is the result of the processing of the brain. It's identical to the functionality of the brain, the neuronal firing and the circuitry of the brain causes the mind. Right, the information processing theory is a part of it. That in IIT it's called the integrated information theory. But the other side of this is called the EM field theory of consciousness, where instead of the actual neurons being the firing of neurons being the result of the cause of consciousness, it's actually the EM fields. It's the EM fields that are identical to the conscious states. Some patterns, not all patterns. It doesn't have to be every type of EM field. Just some patterns can be conscious. Now the problem is, it's really hard to see what kind of evidence will work for the work as a confirmation of the second theory and not as the first theory. Whatever evidence that we have discussed can work as both from both sides. It's really not clear how those two theories are being separated. Maybe later on we'll figure out a way to do it, but current evidence gathering technology in this field is not up to the mark of that requirement. And I'm not even sure how what will work as a separator of these two competing. It's not competing, they're independent. It's not like they're mutually exclusive in any way. I guess they are mutually exclusive. If one is true, the other one isn't, but I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but the point is, I can't even because of the heart problem we can never know. I'm not even sure of. I cannot be like absolutely sure with a mathematical proof about anyone else's consciousness. I mean, I assume everyone else is conscious, and around me, the dogs and the cats and the people I meet, they look like they're conscious, they feel they're conscious, they behave like they're conscious, they talk about consciousness as well. They talk about the good and bad states of the mind and all those interesting things. But the fact is that it's not a solid bulletproof mathematical proof of consciousness, in the sense that we cannot know down to which organism does the consciousness go. We think it's maybe is a fly conscious? Surely a bacteria cannot be conscious. A bacterium cannot be conscious, right? Virus is definitely not conscious because they don't even have working parts, or so I would assume. So there is some place where consciousness arises, and the hard problem makes it very difficult to understand how we can even know in the future. And sometimes David Chalmers um, seems right, but I like the optimism of Anil Seth's work. Maybe I'll start with that soon in the next few episodes, but that is the biggest problem I have. And so that's it. That's the first chapter. What will work as evidence, and how do we gather it, and what are the pitfalls in the methodology of gathering that evidence? All those interesting things. I'm not even sarcastic. They are very interesting because as a lay person, you don't know how hard it is. This is why I think everyone should know the scientific process. Everyone should be told about the scientific process in their studies, and everyone should be told about the different ways in which data are gathered, in order to know what is the truth, so that people understand it's not easy to know things, it's not easy to understand. Then a layperson can really question claims like, oh, this is good for you, this haldi is good for you for such and such, and this is bad for you because of such and such. Not all are wrong, but it's a lot of people use uh, this to their advantage. Oh, these are essential oils, they are good for you, they are known to be good for you because they are extracted from this root of the tree which was used in Ayurvedic medicine or whatnot. And scientists really roll their eyes, at least some of them, towards that, because they are in the field of figuring out the truth. That's one thing. Second thing that I really liked about this chapter was the fact that to be an experimental scientist, you have to be really creative. If you don't consider creativity a part of being a scientist, you think, yeah, okay, there is a creative field, the arts, the movies, and the cinema and whatnot, and then there is the scientific field, the getting the data and doing the experiment again and again, and coming up with the um, new functionality and thinking about the word in a different way. But that is all really creative. The whole process is so creative. You need to find a way to get valid evidence. You need to be creative enough to distinguish between, to somehow differentiate between the noise and data. And that is highly, highly creative work. And people don't know that. People think, actually, in a day to day scenario, I would presume someone who's an artist does more mundane tasks than, maybe I'm wrong, but okay, that's what comes up when you don't know anything about anything. 19 minutes are up, and I should stop at this bigger summary episode. And I believe I would do such summary episodes once in 7-8 days, depending on chapter ending, maybe at the end of every chapter this time. And thanks for listening if you are listening. And do share this with other people who you think will find it interesting. To comment, I would love if you can comment and ask anything, or tell me how I'm doing. If you find this interesting, if you find this boring, if you think I've missed some points, if you think I've jumped over some interesting things to discuss, if I should read something about this and incorporate those ideas into this, whatever you feel, if it rustles your jimmies or whatever it's called. And of course, yeah, like the video. And take care, and talk to you tomorrow. And today is 31st October, so people are scaring each other in different parts of the world. Not here in India, but yeah. So happy that Halloween. I don't know.